Welcome, everyone, for another great episode of the Identity Security Unleashed for the AI Era. My name is Oded Hareven. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Aquilus. And within our series, we're having great conversations with leaders, practitioners, and thought leaders within the industry, cybersecurity, identity, security within particular. Today, we have great three special guests within us, basically discussing the evolution of secrets management to secretless. We have Richard Barreto with us, CISO of Progress. Hey, Rich, how are you?
Good, how are you doing? To see
Fine,
you
very
again,
good.
Odette.
Yeah, good to see you. And Nibin Philip, the head of information and cybersecurity, STP Nuclear Operating Company. Hey, Nibin, how are you with us?
Good. How are you?
Fine, very good. And James Azar, CISO at Artera Services. James?
Hey, Oded, what's happening? Thanks for having me, buddy.
Of course, of course. Thank you, the three of you, for joining us for this episode within our series. I want to talk a bit about Achilles, just in terms of the overview for the ones that have not seen previous episodes within our series. So Achilles is a cybersecurity identity security provider. We're trusted by top brands, Fortune 10 and Global 50, as you can see within different industries such as financial, retail, tech, pharma, and more. We have basically SaaS, native hybrid SaaS solution to run billions of transactions. We run more than 200 billion machine interactions on an annual basis. We've seen more than 500% of growth since 2021 to this year alone. We're backed by prominent investors, among them Deutsche Bank as well. And we've been covered and endorsed by several industries, analysts, all within the time that we're active. That's it for now. Basically, we'll go over all kind of interesting stuff, but let's start with the breaches. And again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us in this, and we'll have a very interesting discussion about what's going on. And let's start with what we see in front of us. This is some breaches examples for the last 5 years. And as you can see, machine identities and their secrets are the number one attack vector. They're all kind of reports and all kind of data points that strengthen that. But as you can see here in front of you, passwords, tokens, standing privileges, access keys, stolen credentials, stolen tokens, compromised credentials, all of that keep repeats itself more and more within all of those different breaches that are being brought here. Lately, also Salesforce have been added here. So definitely this is an ongoing thing that is happening more and more. And what you can see here is that 70% of secrets from 2022 are still active today. So basically, this is a phenomena in which we're seeing for years now. I believe that the last 5 years it has been increased even further, in which we're seeing those credentials being used and somehow being hacked. There are plenty of those reasons, but we also see that they're not well rotated, right? We also see that this is an example coming from one of our partners, Git Guardian, in which they've looked at different secrets that out there that they found within GitLab and GitHub projects, where 70% of those are still active today. So I'm gonna start with a question to this great forum. Why do you think that we're in this situation in which for years we've been investing in all kind of different solutions of managing those credentials, those passwords, those API keys? Uh, but frankly, it looks like that the industry for a long time have not been able to actually overcome this. Either we did not deploy, either we did not do. Why exactly we're not able to fix this? And Rich, let's start with you this time.
It comes down to daily workflow, bad habits, and trying to create a place where they can create these secrets in a much easier way that they can rotate. But with just coding different places, different tools, it's not easy. Different languages. And so, depending on your organization, especially if you're a growing organization, you have thousands of applications that you're dealing with, integrations that you're dealing with, and it's a sprawl, and the attack surface just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. Uh, with tools, it helps to try to minimize the sprawl, but it really just comes down to bad habits.
All right. James, would you like to go second?
Yeah, I mean, following up Richard's always hard. Um, but I'll say this. when you look at the main challenges why this continues to happen, it's because we've we've been sold and developers have been sold a fallacy. The fallacy is you create an API key and no one can ever get to it, no one can ever do anything with it. It's there and you don't have to change it. And we've never really considered the fact that that part of that API tokens were part of an identity until a few years ago, right? Because there was a period in time where we used to talk about API security, not identity security. I mean, there was a time where Gartner actually had that as a category, right? They may still have, I don't know. But this all kind of goes into this idea that we've really kind of dismembered and kind of created all these various categories instead of just addressing it all as identity. And then if we addressed it all as identity, then identity first principles would apply, no different than every single one of us requires MFA, right? Like everyone here would require MFA on a human
Mm,
identity. And we talk about rotating passwords and rotating and refreshing tokens, but we don't
yeah.
do that with any other identity. Because again, I think developers, this isn't security's problem necessarily as well. Security has to deal with the fallout. The problem revolves around the fact that within the developer cycle, we're not really requiring a rotation. We're not really adding that as part of the dev.
So I'd like to push that a little bit, push that button
No,
maybe
no, go.
furthermore, and then I'll ask Niben with that, and you gentlemen, then maybe you'll be able to add later. We all know for a fact that audits and compliance have asked for rotation for more than 10 years now in different places. And sure, there are some companies that they need to comply less with all kind of audits and compliance, and they are less regulated. And yet, even ISO 27001, so basic, is now asking those rotation practices, and still we're seeing those breaches continue. So I'm gonna make it a little bit more harder for us, and I'm putting obviously me together with you guys as a cybersecurity practitioner inside of things that I've seen in the Israeli Defense Forces years back. So Niben, why do you think that although audits is required, and we see regulations that speaks the language of rotation, what do you think that they're not yet there? We're not able to yet completely be able to eliminate that current issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's not just the compliance piece, right? The fear of downtime. In my world, availability is king. So we often see breaches persist because teams are terrified to rotate the credentials on legacy systems. So, for example, if rotating a key risks crashing a critical application, operation teams will fight to keep that static key in place. So humans always want to come up with a workaround. So when security controls create frictions, engineers find workarounds. We see breaches happens not because the security vault itself failed, but because someone just wanted to bypass it to get the job done faster. So, for example, saving a key in a script or a config file to avoid the hassle. So we are often dealing with systems that were built 15 or 20 years ago. They weren't designed for modern security walls. So attackers know this and they target those older, harder to update integration points. So it's not just the compliance piece for us, it's availability.
Yeah, so complexity, it's hard to change. It takes time. Maybe even mislabeling, as James, as you've suggested, right? Mislabeling the challenge and the potential solution. Any further comments on that end, guys? Okay. If not, then I'll move on to something obviously very much related. So I want to take you through the journey that we're seeing within the secretless machine authentication, which is kind of the ideal of how Achilles and some within the industry are recommending to go through the journey of basically stop this addiction, I would call it, to static secrets, and to go to the more advanced authentication ways to reduce the risk of breaches, right? So the journey starts with actually acknowledging the number of static secrets that you have, centralizing all of those, and to be able to first understand. The second is the ability to leverage Achilles to perform this automatic rotation which is basically defining the object that would help you to automatically rotate every 30 days, every 60 days. But then we also understood that rotation is not enough. Rotation still keeps those identities available whenever they're not being used, right? So there is still a database account even when you don't see the moon, right? Even when you don't see the moon, it's still there. So even when you're not using the identity is still there. So we wanted to provide a mechanism that would basically reduce the risk for breach as a result of using this particular identity. So we created this dynamic identities or dynamic secret, as the industry calls it, based on just-in-time principles, right? So whenever a certain workload requires access to, let's say, a database, then we're able to create those credentials and later to delete those. So this is temporary and based on just-in-time and zero standing privileges approaches. The first generation is called Secretless and based on OAuth mechanisms, OIDC, SPIFFE Inspire, that the name Secretless is obviously to imply that the chances to get the secret is very low, but the industry started to call that actually with understanding that there is a token out there, but it's very short in time. So there is no provision for an identity. So whenever a certain workload requires access to, let's say, a certain API, assuming that this API supports OAuth, then Achilles is able to provide this token for a short-lived time. It can be for a certain transaction, for a certain minute, 10 minutes, and so on. And that reduces, obviously, the chance to get this token and to perform a breach by exploiting this token to a very bare minimum. So I want to ask you guys, when you look at this journey, how does it, refer to the way that you look at it within your existing places or any previous places that you've been at? James, let's start with you this time. How do you see this journey of moving on to Secretless? Is it something that is achievable, as well as the difficulties that you encounter?
So everything's achievable if it's a priority for an organization, right? The question is going to be, as you kind of talked a little bit ago around compliance, will ISO 27001 update its requirement, or will SOC 2, or beyond all that, will your key customers require you to go that route? Meaning, will that become a contractual obligation that some companies will require that change of behavior? Because when we look at this specifically from a business point of view, behavior like this has changed from one of very few reasons, right? Like we all want to go to that realm of secretless, right? Of just everything kind of constantly rotating and evolving. I don't know anyone that would say no to that proposition, but there's a cost to go there and there's complexities to get there. So what's going to drive that is the business understanding we have to go that route. So that's either going to be regulatory requirement, which would be, oh, there's my thumbs up.
Yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
right? The second thing for this would potentially be contractual requirements coming from key vendors or customers that you work with within the industry that require you to have a specific set of requirements to integrate into their environment, which essentially ends up rolling that downstream. Or the third reason is an organization that has the security budget and the desire to be market leading because they see that as something that benefits them specifically. Otherwise, I think the hill to climb is very, very difficult.
All right, that's interesting. It's a lot about um, the demand to somehow change the demand of where to implement that because you need.
But there's going to be
You're saying,
pushback.
yeah, there's gonna be
Developers,
pushback,
right? There's going to
but
be
then
pushback from developers, business costs. Who's getting more money in 26? Most budgets are flat, right? How many CISOs do you know that are going in saying, "Hey, my budget grew by 15%?" I think I was
yeah.
looking at a research, like a little research for 2026. I think that was under 5%.
Well, there is some opportunity there with AI, but we'll talk about that later on. Rich, to you, I see that you have your own angle on this one. The
So
journey is difficult for sure. This is
the
clear. This
journey
is
is
clear.
difficult. So there's a lot of reasons, time and resources, which James talked about. There's tribal knowledge. Niven initially talked about legacy, right? So you don't know what the impact of any of these changes. And Yeah, it comes down to what's the business value, right? And the way what James was talking about, I was just listening to him. Life is pretty simple. We do things for only really two reasons: to avoid pain and to find pleasure. Compliance is a pain. Audits complaint is a pain. Fines are a pain. If it generates revenue for the business and if it improves our trust and recognition with our customers, we're going to do it. I like the idea about the contract, right? And getting our customers to contract with your company to make sure those things happen. So it all comes down to business, like James said, it's business prioritization and what can you do within the time and resources. For my organization, we had to look at it from a risk-based perspective because that's the only way we're going to get the best value. You can't go change the secrets or static secrets in every single piece of code when there's ones that are high value and low value. So I would say you got to, first of all, find out where all your secrets are, and then look at your most critical applications to the organization, and then figure out from there your pecking order of what needs to be done first, because there's not enough time and resources or tools, in fact, right? Because those require money as well.
Yeah. All right. Maybe in your angle.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, my point is going to be aligned with what James and Richard just mentioned. In high state environment, we like things to be deterministic, right? We want to know exactly what will happen. Dynamic secrets can sound scary because they introduce constant change. So the journey for us is proving that dynamic is actually safer and more reliable than human manually updating password, which is something that is a challenge, right? So we have to remove the human bottleneck for sure. For example, the biggest operational benefit of going secretless isn't just security, it's removing the dependency on having humans. No one has to remember to update a certificate or a key. The system handles it, right? So, which actually reduces the risk of human error causing an outage. So, we always have to remember the hybrid reality. We have to be realistic. We will likely have a hybrid state for a long time. Modern applications running secretless and legacy applications or infrastructure relying on hard and secret walls, right? So the goal is to stop the legacy footprint from growing. I mean, that's something that we need to focus on.
Yeah, I think that, you're mentioning here a very interesting and a very good angle that I do hear a lot in the industry, that it's okay to start with a greenfield. It's okay to start with the newer places that you want to provide a better, more updated policy making, right? And better implementation, and then to think of creative solutions that you can do, and sometimes you cannot, or it's very difficult to use the same mechanisms within your legacy or older environments. Let's call it this way. But I wanna pause here for a second and to share with you something, that because the thing that you're sharing here sounds like, it reminds me of a past where we spoke the same about application security, guys. If you remember, 10 years back, we said it's very much more difficult to change vulnerabilities within the code. Developers, right? We were all talking the same language, where developers were very reluctant to make the changes in order to make sure that the code itself is more secure. But when you think of it, we actually had a very, very interesting, and I guess that you see in front of you right now. If you remember, in the last 5 years, we talked about a shift left within security, right? Basically, or for the audience that might not be that, let's call it familiar with this, then this is the CI/CD loop. This is the DevOps loop that speaks about the buildup of the code, the build, the test, and then the running it, the deploying it, observability. And obviously, this does not necessarily have a relation specifically for security. But what's beautiful here is that in the last 5 years, we've seen good examples of shifting security left, bringing the security from only on the runtime, within the infrastructure. We were hardening, right? This is basically 20 years back, 15 years back. We were hardening the infrastructure. And today it's so natural for us to speak about security within the CI processes. So we're talking about CI/CD, changing CVEs. Lately, I've seen also very interesting startups that are able to literally change the CVEs automatically using AI, which is magnificent. I wonder if this is not the time for us to find the power and to say identity should be next thing. Shift identity left and bring identity much sooner within the process of software making. Question mark, is AI the right time for us to do so? So Niven, I'm gonna bring this now for you first. What do you think about this potential shift identity left? Is that possible? Can that help us to mitigate those challenges and to be able to help us move sooner to authentication and authorization advanced capabilities?
Yeah, completely agree. Identity should be part of the shifting left mentality, right? So we're looking at identity as an architecture. So shifting left means identity becomes part of the architecture, not an afterthought. So we need to define who connects to what in the design phase, no try to patch it after deployment, right? So standardization, it's about consistency. If every developer manages secrets differently, it's a nightmare to audit. If we provide a
Yeah.
standard method where the identity is baked into the build pipeline, we get better security and cleaner code. So that's my perspective. And also from a governance perspective, when identity is defined in the pipeline, we can see it. We can actually audit the intent before it ever reaches production. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, and it goes to the education, isn't it? Right.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's the ability to communicate with the other side, to communicate with the developers and engineerings, and to be able to have them to take that in account. I wonder if there are tools to do that, and obviously, I'll suggest some of that later on. Um, Rich and James, you'll be the last one because I gave you the first earlier. So, Rich, maybe to you, what do you see about this shifting identity left? Is it even achievable? What do we
Oh,
need to do in order to make that happen?
100% it is. It's achievable. It so if you can build a good guardrails, right? So then you just basically build a happy path for engineers, so it doesn't have to be an afterthought. That's the route we want to take. Now, it takes time to build that happy path and build those guardrails with automation and detection, so that it can be done proactively and then stop the bad behavior. I wouldn't call it bad behavior, but the practice, right, when it's about to be committed either into production. It's achievable, but it takes, like with anything, right? It takes a bit of engineering and also being thoughtful. It I think where the shift was, and I think this is what also helped, the shift was when you go back 10, 20 years ago, all our applications are very monolithic. So you make one change, you don't know what it was going to break. Now in this day and age of SaaS services and microservices, you can make a change and the impact is minimal, right? There's a smaller attack surface or impact. And that allows us more flexibility and agility to do that. So absolutely believe that it can be achieved, but it takes some engineering and thoughtfulness in how to create that happy path.
All right, so happy path and take it with engineering. So James, over to you.
Yeah, so shifting identity left doable. I agree with Rich and Ibn. Um, I think there's a path to get there. The question is going to remain, I think, at least in my world and Ibn's world, which has a bit more OT in it, right? How do you do that on legacy? Because it's easy to do that on SaaS and kind of modern networks. When you get to legacy environments and SCADA environments and ICS environments, that's where I get a little bit more skeptical of whether or not that happy place can be found. And we see that in manufacturing today, right? Manufacturing is the ultimate example of kind of SCADA and OT and IT meeting and I won't name the victims of the recent crimes, but there was one that required a government bailout loan in order to keep a country from losing 4% of its GDP, right? These things come into play where in theory, if you were a modern enterprise, this shift left in identity should be something that's a good 18 to 24 month project, right, Richard? I mean, you're modern. I think for Nabin and I, that's a bit more of a okay, we could probably do it in our IT environments. We could trying to touch our OT environments is significant, I think, in any aspect. Even when you try to switch out a firewall, there's
Yeah.
the steps you have to go through are complex. Nevertheless, try to create some sort of identity routine and play. Um, that creates a whole other challenge. Not to say it's not doable. I just think that trying to say that everything is doable for everyone simultaneously is a lot more difficult. I think when you look at modern fintech and SaaS companies, I think the shift left for identity across the entire enterprise is something that's doable. When you look at manufacturing, energy, oil and gas, I I would say there's significant risks with going that route because of the
Yeah.
intricacies that go on within those environments.
So I listen to you, and then I'm thinking of, a different element that we've had with identity long time back when we spoke about those passwords that, we've had for humans. And what troubled us all across, and I'm going back again 15 years back, that everyone had so many different passwords, but I think that people have looked at it more from a complexity problem rather than the security problem, they're the security challenge. So we've created this concept of SSO, right? We said, if you remember back then, today it's called identity provider, right, for humans, like XAML. And we thought about, oh my God, we have so many, software, shelf software that we're not able even to change, and it was not SAML friendly, and there was no standards back then. So back then we started with all kind of solutions that inject those passwords, where the goal was for the users, for the end users within the organizations, not to remember those passwords at all. Um, I think that what pushed this was also the customer IAM that came in for a multi-channel enablement, and to make sure that everyone can use the same account, and not to use different accounts whenever they need it. Anyway, the reason that I'm bringing this is because when you think of it, we also named that challenge back then that this will be more difficult to change. We won't be able to change the industry. It will take time. It did take time. But what we did invent back then as an industry is that North Star of saying, let's move to more proactivity. Let's start saying that we will start using an identity provider so that people would be able to stop using those passwords. And with time, we're going to migrate more and more of those softwares to be able to absorb that. So I would challenge this forum and talk about the identity provider for machines. And let me share with you what is the concept here that we're obviously with Achilles, that concept that we have started and actually implemented as well. Basically, shifting the mind from reactive, right? Saying, let's go after the developers and start changing stuff, then actually being proactive and basically put on the table a new philosophy, a new terminology for machines. So here it goes. What you see in front of you, and I call it a more very simplistic way of saying SSO for machines, although I believe that the best way to call it is machine identity provider, right? The need is going to be, and the demand for that is not just from the era of complexity and security, but I believe that there will be a necessity for that given the new AI agents applications, or whatever you want to call them. But basically, those AI agents would require further connectivity and further authentication and authorization across environments. We're going to see that grow more and more. Traditionally, with workloads, developers and platform teams traditionally have had those implemented those within a certain environment, a certain cloud provider. They've took the front end, the back end, and the database, usually, all right, generally speaking, within the same environment. Although some links have happened between cloud and on-prem, it was, I will call that a moderate comparing to what the future would provide. The reasons for that is number one, the built-in architecture of AI agents that require multi-connectivity between environments. In this example, by the way, you see here a Neo Cloud that provides the LLM model, or a SaaS provider like OpenAI that provides the actual model, the orchestrator to be ran within a certain, let's say, cloud provider, whatever it is, and then the MCP server that wraps the data itself, in which the AI agent and the LLM model requires, that would sometimes even be on our on-prem, right? So we're going to see more and more of that demand within the architecture of AI agents, but also when AI agents will start communicate with each other. And that will bring a big boom and demand, if you want it, for what we call a cross-domain authentication and authorization. The only way to provide that, and I'm talking now even educationally, to basically bring those application teams and the new AI programs that are starting to implement those within organizations, is to put that idea on the table today within your excellence committee that says, guys, let's stop talking about managing credentials. Let's stop talking about managing the secrets or rotating them. Let's start now talk about the concept of identity providers. So for that, every application that is now being created should go to the identity provider to provide it with an identity on demand dynamically. Of course, it's a greenfield thing and it will take us some time to change. But when you look at Gen AI and the way that will be able to refactor our applications very soon, I know that for some environments like Nibin is serving and James is serving, within the OT, it might take more time, but eventually it will happen there as well. So what do you think about this concept of having an identity provider and basically laying down this idea of proactivity and to educate by that, the developers, given that we don't have any other choice, this is about to come, and the needs for multi-authentication and multi-IP connectivity would happen very soon. So this time, Nibin, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with the reactive security, right? The cost of reactive security itself. For us, for example, reactive security is too late for critical systems. We can't afford to wait for an alert that says a credential was compromised. The impact is too high for that. Going back to what James explained earlier, everybody likes to have proactive or predictive systems or baselines, absolutely, but it's hard to achieve in operational technology. So proactive means pretty much understanding the baseline behavior. So let's say if a machine identity typically reads from one database or application and suddenly it tries to write to another, we need to stop that immediately. We need controls that detect that drift in behavior. But how do you implement that in OT? That's always going to be a challenge. But anything outside OT, it's feasible, right? So we could have automated responses, for example. We need to move forward toward automated containment. For example, if the trust level drops and the access should be revoked automatically, we can't really rely on a human analyst staring at a dashboard to catch it in time. So we have to use an automated system for that. So absolutely, I agree. We could go in that direction, but it's challenging, especially in the OT side.
All right. Rich, let's go with you now.
If you can build a happy path for engineers, I think this is one way to get there. Right? You're providing them something systematically that they don't even have to think about. It's already pre-built. Right? The pattern's already pre-built. There's enablement already pre-built. The education's pre-built. It can happen. Going back to what Niven said, in OT, I can see how that's difficult, right? Because you have a lot of legacy systems. They've existed for not years, but maybe even decades, right? So how do you go back? Anything that I think it's easier. But there is going to be a call for that because, especially with AI, that you and I talked about this personally, it's exacerbating the whole area of identity, right? Because there's more increased workloads, there's more API to API integrations. It's not just, especially with agentic AI, it's not a one-to-one, it's a one-to-many. And so how do you manage that sprawl, which is going to be a challenge for our industry. And so, yeah, you definitely need something systematically to be able to give you that governance and guardrails and to be able to rotate those passwords at will. We talked about this too, Oded, like in the future with quantum, there's going to be post-quantum encryption, and you're going to need encryption at a packet level because it's going to be that the velocity of finding these or breaking the encryption is going to be, that big of a problem that we have to get to that level at a packet level. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely, would need a system, but it's going to take time for adoption, which is always a challenge.
All right, we're going back to a lot of education. This is something that I believe that it will be the first takeout when we think about what's the summary for us when we talk about, with CISOs and IAM leaders. I think the main thing, if I recognize correctly, is education and relationship between the security and the platform, which always goes back to this. James, what's your view on this?
Yeah, so I don't have much to add from what Richard and Nibin said. I think they've covered it fairly well. I'll kind of reinforce the point that you said, which is anytime we look to shift the market left, it's not just about educating the CISOs, right? Which are going to be the you could say the executive sponsor of the shift left up within the organization, but it really does involve educating the entire line of business, right? From the CIO to the CTO to the developers to helping them understand that process effectively and then helping them understand why to use it. And when you look at, just vibe coding as a prime example, right? I kind of like to use that Cursor example of how fast the 12 months is what it took Cursor to get to 100 million in ARR. And when I was looking even deeper into that number, that 100 million in ARR wasn't enterprise led. In fact, enterprise only accounted for a very small percentage of that 100 million. It was primarily developer led, meaning they were actually very successful in reaching the developer community and getting them to use their tool for vibe coding and getting those people to actually pay for it. I think the same applies here, right? In order to successfully reach that point, we have to reach those developers and then those system administrators and those business owners to go, we definitely need to drive it this way from an adoption perspective in order to really move at scale and speed. And Richard brought up post quantum. You and I've talked about post quantum numerous times. The post quantum world is going to require a platform like Aquilus that's able to rotate secrets because post quantum cryptography means crypto agility. And for those who don't
Yeah.
know what agility means, it means swapping out your exchange keys at a moment's notice because someone was able to actually break that. And the business, and this is where AI, business, regulatory, they're all going to come together, and it's really what's going to drive this machine identity kind of revolution in the front and center.
So, commenting on what you just said, James and Richard, you've mentioned, and they've been within your saying. There's a lot of education and being able to influence our counterparts within platform and within engineering. And I'm thinking here, for years, identity as an organization, it became like a siloed team. When you think of how the CISO organization is structured, some teams are greater, bigger than others, and some are not. So we sometimes see this identity specialist, IAM specialist, but within greater teams, again, it's a silo. And I'd like to ask you, as a discussion point here, couldn't we be better if identity could have been cross-functional specialty instead of being a silo of its own? Rich, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I completely agree. Uh, so build a center of excellence around identity. I think where it goes back to even just access management, but now it's taken to a different level, a different abstracted layer of machines on human identity, secrets, tokens, etc. Someone has to drive it. You're absolutely right. In big enterprises, a lot of things operate in silos. Unless there's some level of governance and someone driving it from a central perspective, that's the only way it's going to get achieved, from my experience, because everyone has different priorities. But if there's someone driving it and has oversight over it, and then there's an executive sponsor, and there's absolute, Paul, a complete ROI and good business value with good business outcomes, it's achievable, but someone has to drive it.
Yeah, it sounds to me like, even when you're thinking of the organization within CISOs, the data security silo, the cloud security silo, a lot of it has a lot to do with how we've used to do architecture, how we thought about the newer environments versus the older environments. Maybe a good example of this new fusion is actually the security operations center and the SecOps, right? The ops that came into our life, which became cross-functional, right? Ops that absorbs all of this data and actually operates potential breaches, etc. But again, identity sounds to me like it is so much related to all of those different parts. And I wonder again if this should be or shouldn't be a cross-functional instead of a siloed approach. James, what do you think about that?
So the challenge you have with that is the issue of governance within an organization, right? Typically, IT manages identities in terms of issuing identities and so forth, and security oversees it and sets the governance of it. And so the idea that you can just create an identity team across the business is smart. It's just a question of how you intertwine it within the DNA of the business. You may be able to create an IM team, but it's never going to really be fully under security, right? You may have to have a kind of an IM ambassador sitting on the developer side to help manage the non-human identities. You may need to have someone on the IT side to help manage the human side
It's
of
a
it.
start. It's
Yeah.
a start.
Yeah, but you definitely have to get smarter in terms of how you do it and kind of how you spread it across the organization, because if it's not part of the business you're trying to really change, and it just becomes something with a written policy that you have to observe, that battle is way uphill.
Yeah. Well, Nibin, on your end?
Yeah, I agree with everything that James and Richard mentioned. I know from a solution perspective, we all are trying to unify or have like single platform where multiple solutions are tied together, just like that. Even from an identity perspective, it's good to have a unified strategy so that you could implement a strategy that integrates with the different components of IAM to work with different departments, pretty much seamlessly. And it fosters collaboration. And again, it's not easy to do it because change always is something that's not easy to implement, right? But I'm pretty sure that with the right effort, we could foster that collaboration.
Thank you so much, Nibin. And gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all for this great opportunity to have your opinions and to pick your brain. If there's anything else that you'd like to add, this is a great opportunity. So just unmute if you have any. But if not, Elaine, I'd like to thank you and also to invite you to our next episode and to join that. So again, thank you, Richard Barreto. Thank you, James Lazar. Thank you, Nibin Philip, for joining for this great session. I had a good time, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. So on our next episode, we're going to focus on the unified governance across every vault. I'm going to have a good conversation with Vani, our Director of Solution Engineering here at Achilles. And we're going to we're going to show some demo of how exactly we can have a multi-vault governance so that you'll be able to see, customers are able to see everything that is running on their cloud vaults as well as on their on-prem open source vaults that they have, and to basically centralize this whole process within one single pane of glass. Again, guys, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for our audience, and we'll see you next time.